news presentation.
And it's just gone 9:30. You're watching Interface here on SABC2. A warm welcome. My name is Samachele. Well, as I'm sure you've heard by now, 84 South Africans have died in the collapsed church building in Lagos, Nigeria, and scores more have been injured. South African media are reporting that the fatalities could have been reduced had the Nigerian government acted promptly. There are also allegations from Nigerian and South African rescue and emergency teams that the church prevented them from helping. According to reports, the Nigerian government refused emergency help from South Africa and frustrated the government's efforts to get information. But the South African government has denied that relations with Nigeria are frosty over the disaster. Now, on Interface tonight, we ask, what is the use of diplomatic relations if they fail to secure and protect the lives of people traveling between countries? And joining us from our Pretoria studios is Dr. Somadoda Fikeni, who is a political analyst and also a policy analyst based at UNISA. And from our parliamentary studios, we are joined by Vuyani Green, who is the SABC's parliamentary editor, who also lost a family member in the tragedy. Remember, as always, if you would like to comment on our Facebook page, it's Interface on SABC2, or you can tweet us at Thembisa Magele or at Interface on SABC. Welcome to both of you. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Fikeni and Vuyani.
Thank you for inviting us to be part of your program.
Only a pleasure. Dr. Fikeni, two versions have emerged out of this tragedy. The one is that this was a pure accident that could have happened to anybody, and the other one is that this was a case of gross negligence and flouting of building regulations. Which one rings true for you?
Well, I do think that there are signs of negligence all over the place, and as such, even when the incident has happened, the kind of response shows that there was a bit of negligence, that it has taken this long. And it also showed the gaps in the relationship between South Africa and Nigeria. There are many gaps in terms of their cooperation or lack of cooperation in terms of this particular situation.
Is that because the relations between the two countries are indeed frosty, or is that just a figment of our imagination?
Well, I do think that it's historical that Nigeria and South Africa, being the two biggest states in the sub-Saharan Africa, and also vying for the same things such as the seat in the Security Council, and that in itself, over the years, from the time when Mandela was saying a stand should be taken against Sonny Abacha, up to the more recent past, there have been moments of some diplomatic skirmishes. But at the same time, there seemed to have been a time when President Thabo Mbeki and President Obasanjo were presidents, where their chemistry seemed to have lifted this relationship to a higher pedestal than it is.
Now, Vuyani, Dr. Fikeni was talking a little earlier on about the time lag in the response from whether it's the South African government or the Nigerian government. Just recount for us your personal experience of how you heard of your cousin's passing.
Yes, Thembisa, thank you very much for inviting me to your program. This incident, I heard about it on Saturday, I think a day after it took place. I was listening to one of our sister radio stations, newscast in the morning, and I heard that there was this disaster in Nigeria. And I immediately realized that I have a cousin there, because he had called me on Thursday evening telling me that he had traveled to Nigeria. So I tried to make contact with international relations officials to find out whether are there any casualties, you know. Unfortunately, I was given a number, and I tried to contact that number. They told me that they didn't have any details. And I tried to contact my cousin. His phone was off, and I discovered that he had last, checked his WhatsApp on Friday at 2 o'clock South African time. So it was a battle on that weekend to get information, because we didn't know what's happening, whether he was among the casualties, because news reports on that weekend put the figure around 15, 20, and that's when we began to be worried.
All right, let me just say also that we did invite Mr. Jeff Khadebe as head of the interministerial team looking into this disaster, and also we invited the Nigerian High Commission, and both of them could not be available for this discussion. So, Vianney, having gone through a couple of days now of hearing from Nigeria and from the South African authorities, has the flow of information gotten better for you as a family?
Tembisa, I can, speaking for my family, the Matsila family, I can, tell you up front that we're none the wiser. We don't know anything except what we've gleaned from media reports. You recall that most of my folks back in Queenstown in the Eastern Cape are in rural areas, and some, they don't speak English. Some of the press conferences that were, that took place in Pretoria were conducted in English. And secondly, as you know, in most African culture, families, when there's a bereavement, there are night, prayer meetings that take place. Yeah. And people don't watch television and don't listen to radio station as part of the mourning process. So, my family has been in the dark with regard to this matter. We don't know what's happening. We've received conflicting information. The first one came from Nigeria, a Nigerian gentleman who identified himself as from that church, right, who told us that my cousin Thomas Matsila was among the deceased. Okay. And then later on, a few days later, we received a call from a certain Dr. Mayekiso, informing us that my cousin Thomas was among the people who are unaccounted for.
Okay, we need to take a short break. We need to take a short break, Vianney. And when we come back, Dr. Figen, I want to ask you about how coordinated the efforts have been to try and get information to the families. And we have to take a short break. Now, remember that if you would like to take part in this discussion, you can always find us on Facebook. It's Interface on SABC2, or on Twitter. It's at Tembisa Magele or at Interface on SABC. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Interface. We're talking about what happened in Nigeria and also taking your thoughts on social media. We're chatting from our Pretoria studios to Dr. Somadoda Fikeni, who is a political and policy analyst based at UNISA, and Vianney Green is an SABC journalist who is based in Cape Town, and he joins us because he lost a family member in this tragedy. And so let's get back to you, Dr. Fikeni. Vianney was just recounting how difficult it has been for them to get information. On the other hand, we've had reports that it's been quite easy for some families to get information. What do you make of the South African government's response to the tragedy and in communicating with the families?
Well, I think it was a delayed response, and I'm not sure whether it's because they were not getting information from the other side. But once they got the information, I do think that their response and their willingness to assist the families has been quite positive and good. And that they are taking responsibility for transportation, and they are taking their patients to the hospitals. That is what many nations, when you have a calamity of this nature, do. And at this stage, I think they've done well. But on the other side, the information seems not to be coming and is not readily available from the Nigerian side. You can almost tell from the interviews with the ambassador, with our government officials, that in a very subtle manner they are expressing their frustration.
So the criticism then that diplomatic and political considerations in this case have taken over or taken precedence over the saving of people's lives, would that be a fair criticism?
Not necessarily. There are protocols which countries have to follow, and there are certain things you can't do. You can't even go hold a press conference or bring your ambulances or helicopters to fetch your people once it is in another country. So those are the protocol issues. They are only made easy if there is an organic relationship between the two countries, which is warm and effective.
Vuyani, have you sent a picture to the authorities? You know, who are you waiting to hear from?
We are waiting to hear from South African authorities. We've been in touch with senior government officials and, you know, who tried to explain to me, especially over the last 2 days, that they are doing everything in their powers to try and repatriate those bodies, including that of my cousin. Over the weekend, yes, I did send, you know, pictures of my cousin. Those are pictures, by the way, that he sent to me after touching down in Lagos. So I tried to distribute those pictures to a number of people somewhere in Lagos, because I got in touch with someone who knew a person who was there, who survived that incident, who attended a church there. And I asked that person, you know, to identify my brother there. But unfortunately, they could not, you know, identify him. In fact, they told me that he was not among the people who were attending church on Sunday. As you know, that after that accident on Sunday, that, you know, pastor held a service, you know, in that church. And many people might have watched it on YouTube and stuff like that.
Dr. Fikeni, should we as a country be worried that so many South Africans went to a foreign country to seek help and were desperate enough to go look outside of South Africa to go and get help? Should we be bothered by that, or is that just the way the cookie crumbles?
We certainly must be bothered by that, because when people join and mass some of the charismatic churches seeking solutions, it's an indicator that there are certain difficulties in a country where they are, and there are many uncertainties that one can mention: unemployment, the breakdown of family, the HIV/AIDS, crime levels, and also many other aspirations and dreams which people have not realized within the context of freedom, which they had always promised themselves. Economic hardships, all those make people look everywhere for solutions. Therefore, we ought to be worried about the psyche and our collective psychological and emotional state as a country that would be running in that direction.
So considering that and considering what's happened, you know, the gravity of this tragedy, should Prophet TB Joshua be allowed to come to the country once a month, as he's indicated that's what he'd like to do?
Well, to me, I'm indifferent to that particular gesture, really, whether he wants to come or not. If his followers are ready to receive him and he makes a lot more money by coming this side, because it will be business as usual for him.
What are your thoughts on this one, Vuyani?
Well, I think I agree with Professor Fikeni. Whether or not he comes to South Africa, that won't bring back the life of my cousin. So for me, I really don't care whether he comes to South Africa or not. But I want to, stress the point that at this stage, we are just waiting to hear from the authorities both in Nigeria and in South Africa as to the cause of that disaster. And at this stage, we don't, as a family, we don't want to apportion blame on anyone until such time that investigations have been completed by both governments with regard to this tragedy.
All right, we're going to take another short break. When we come back, we continue to wrap up this discussion and also to take some of your thoughts. To stay with us. Welcome back. We are wrapping up our discussion with Dr. Fikeni, who is a political and policy analyst at UNISA, and also Vuyani Green, who is an SABC journalist who lost a family member in the tragedy in Nigeria. Now, Dr. Fikeni, the whole discussion around Prophet TB Joshua having connections with the Nigerian government, and that's possibly why there was such a slow uptake in the emergency relief and all of that. Is there any truth to that?
Well, remember that a person as rich as the priest is most likely going to have an influence in his country and in the upper echelons of government. And that may also explain the reluctance of the Nigerian government simply saying, we are investigating how the building was put up, and also potentially investigate and interview the owner of the building, which is, Pastor Joshua. So to that extent, people with money tend to keep justice at bay at times.
So when you hear, Vuyani, that the South African government says it's heavily reliant on information and cooperation coming from the Nigerian government, do you trust that the authorities are handling this matter properly?
Well, Nigeria and South Africa, those are two different countries. And I think the manner in which this whole tragedy has been handled by both governments, that testifies to that. And I think the South African government was taken by surprise, or was caught off guard with regard to this matter, especially in terms of crisis communication management strategies, because it took more than 5 days, almost 5 days, for families to be contacted. That's why they're saying, but my family has not been contacted, except from this Nigerian guy that I mentioned, as well as certain Dr. Mayeki, so whom I understand was among the pilgrims who returned to South Africa, about, I think, last week. So from government, there's nothing that we've received as a family officially to notify us what has happened. So that's why I think this whole thing, it has taken them by surprise. But I hope going forward, they're going to make sure that they are proactive in the manner in which they deal with a crisis of this nature.
Have you been able to ascertain if there's any truth to the claims that the pilgrims themselves were asked to surrender their passports to the church when they got there?
Yes, that's what the wife of my cousin told us, because on Sunday morning we managed to get through to the wife, who told us that on Friday, on the day of this incident, she traveled. She left. She had just left the church service with her husband, and the husband wanted to go to that building, which was a guest house, I think, to change some clothing and stuff like that. That's when the incident happened. When she inquired about his whereabouts, she was told that no, her husband was among the people rushed to hospital. And then they were denied, they were not allowed to leave that compound because they don't have the passport. And she told us that the passport apparently were confiscated by that church upon arrival. So they could not, travel freely or go to hospital to try and look for the, for their missing relatives and stuff like that.
Dr. Fikeni, is that even allowed? Should something like that happen?
It should not, but remember, one country differs from another, because in some instances, when you book into a hotel, you'll find that they may want to have your passport. Some simply take a photocopy of your passport, but in this particular case, you can see that it has all the kinds of implications, including the infringement of movement.
So let's just take a quick look at what you had to say on Facebook on this matter and also on Twitter. Kalanga Roberts says, let's wait for the investigation reports before we talk about what happened at the church, because family members and victims need the respect and the closure. And Bertha Mafongosi says, there are so many stories about Nigeria versus South Africa with the kidnapping of the girls. We went down on our knees and prayed, and now there's a building that's collapsed. Wow. And Makwengwe Tengwa says, I don't defend the activities of TB Joshua. I don't know him. I don't think anyone who doesn't belong to his church should bother him or herself with his activities. Cecilia Nyadzeni says, recently a Nigerian journalist, Nicholas Ibekwe, claimed that he turned down a 50,000 naira bribe to write in Prophet TB Joshua's favor. What should we make of such reports? Keep those thoughts coming. There's a whole lot more where that came from, and we will try and get through as much as possible. But Dr. Fikeni, now that we've had all of this happening, and with hindsight being, an exact science, what lessons should we glean from this tragedy?
The first one, as Mr. Green was saying, is our response to disasters affecting our citizens abroad. We were caught seemingly off guard, and we didn't have a ready response to that effect. We are used to dealing with one hostage here, 2 people there, and so forth. And similarly, when something happened in the Central African Republic with our soldiers, it took a while before we had a proper disaster management and communication strategy. So that is one lesson. The second one is that whenever you are having diplomatic relations with a country, I do think that where you may not have this firmed up, in anticipation of disasters of this nature, I think countries working on these issues, saying that even if the relationship may not be optimal, when such issues do come, it might even be a protocol at the AU where they say when disasters are like this, how do we respond in a manner that does not hinder progress and decisiveness.
Right. And Vuyani, have you as a family considered any kind of recourse? You know, are you maybe considering to sue the church or the prophet?
Incidentally, Tembisa, you know, I tried to contact one of my cousins about this matter, and I said, look, once the dust has settled, once we've, you know, found closure, as it were, as the family, and especially after once the investigation has been completed with regard to the cause of that incident, we'll have to sit down as a family and see, you know, what to do. And of course, I mean, we were just part of those 84 families who lost their loved ones, and those who were left maimed and injured, you know, as a result of this. So as a family, we haven't officially taken a position, but I think we'll be guided by the outcome of the investigation and what other families, you know, feelings is with regard to this matter.
All right. Well, all the best to you and your family on this one. And thank you very much for talking to us and for sharing your personal story with us. Thank you also to you, Dr. Fikeni, for coming through to our Pretoria studios to talk to us on this matter. This is a grave tragedy indeed for South Africa and for the world at large. But we do take your thoughts. We continue to talk about this matter, and we want to hear what you feel about it. Do give us your thoughts on our social media pages. And that's how we come to the end of this program this week. From me, Tembisa Magele, and the team, good night.
this, you can see that it has all the kinds of implications, including the
In South Africa, those are two different countries. And I mean, I think this